Peterson was with us, and of course, Dr. Peterson will be back later on in the evening. We were talking about sacrifice and the sort of Christian narrative that undergirds society. And one of the things that it occurs to me that Christians are called to sacrifice, among other things, in many instances, is their sense of self. And religion often gives us a very false sense of self. And Christianity posits that the false sense of self is that we're good. And sadly, I think when Christianity is misused, it's actually misused to reinforce the old religious notion that we're good. And if we're good, then of course we don't need intervention from God in the form of Christ. Why I bring this up right now is because a lot of Christians hang on to this view of themselves that they are above having to get their hands dirty in worldly affairs. And many Christians, for that reason, don't engage in the political process. They think that if they engage in the political process, especially in a moment where you have choices that are, let's call them suboptimal, maybe from a Christian value perspective. I mean, Donald Trump, you can say many good things about Donald Trump. We've said many of them here. He's not a great moral icon. His pro-choice sort of background has really reasserted itself in this election, which is very difficult for Christians. Christians, I think in this country, particularly evangelicals, do not know yet how to reorient their politics in the wake of an event they never thought would occur, which is the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
Which changed everything.
Which changed everything. It makes abortion now a political issue. And political issues are messy issues. When abortion was a sort of abstract judicial issue, Christians could afford to take an abolitionist point of view.
And it was politically beneficial to do so.
And it was politically beneficial to take an abolitionist point of view. Now listen, politics aside, morally, I am a complete abortion abolitionist. You can't be more pro-life than me. I don't want exceptions for rape. I don't want exceptions for incest. I am 100% abortion bad all the way, full stop. But as a political issue, we now have to make a decision. If I lived in California and there was an opportunity for a 14-week abortion ban, I would vote for it. And if it passed, I would then start working on a 12-week abortion ban. But many Christians are simply not willing to give up their image of themselves as pure and perfect and holy and above it all, and get their hands dirty with the difficult compromise that's necessary in politics. And I am concerned that if Christians don't vote, we won't win. There are still 18 minutes to vote, to get in line to vote before the next round of polls close. If you're a Christian and you've been on the fence about the idea of voting, please go stand in line. If you're not in a state where the polls have already closed, please get in line. You have an obligation to vote. Our obligation is not to our view of ourselves. Our obligation, if anything, is to confront our view of ourselves, realize our need. And part of what we get out of grace in Christianity is the opportunity to actually participate in a world that isn't perfect. You only get to participate in that world that isn't perfect if you believe in some sort of system of grace. And I wanted to say that while Dr. Peterson was here, but I didn't get to.
I'll have to do.
So I'm saying it to you. What do you say to this?
Well, for all that conservatives have spent, 4 years at least now, bewailing wokeness and identifying all of its flaws and talking about what a terrible, ugly, self-destructive ideology it is, which it is, and all of that is true, and we should point that out. We still have not, as conservatives or as Christians, reckoned with the fact that wokeness offers people something. Wokeness has a selling point, and it's exactly what you are saying. It's an answer to the question, what must I do to be saved? And for most of my adult life, we've pretended that that question doesn't matter, that we can sweep it under the rug while we pursue material pleasures and technological advancements, and that God is dead or over or irrelevant, and we don't even have to think about virtue or abstract, eternal ideals. That idea turned out to be catastrophically wrong, even among the people who said that they believed it. And this is why the new atheists and all the Sam Harris's and Richard Dawkinses of the world have now been stampeded by a mob of young people desperate for somebody to tell them how they can be good. And woke politics stands right in that gap and says, all you have to do is take the knee. You simply have to proclaim your guilt, you have to confess your systemic racism, or you have to assume your position on the sacrificial pedestal as a minority or whatever, and now you will once again be in the grand cosmic dance of virtue and pollution and sacrifice. Christians are supposed to be different, I think is what you are saying.
That's right.
The Christian pitch is actually something radically other than that, in a way that almost no other ideology or religion offers. G.K. Chesterton says, before you get the good news, you have to get the bad news. And the bad news is that whereas virtue is absolute and God's justice is perfect altogether and his righteousness is entire, we are at an infinite remove from that in the world. And the incarnation is the point of the incarnation. God wouldn't have had to take on flesh and die if he weren't willing to meet us at that imperfect juncture and take the next step toward his perfection from wherever we are, whatever mess it is, however snarled and tangled we are, and boy are we in our past sins and the sins of our fathers and our ancestral guilt. God in Christ takes one step toward God the Father with us. And in terms of politics, this cashes out as the ancient virtue of prudence, which is what you were talking about. The Christian church fathers and the Aristotelians of the ancient world, and I think the rabbis of the Talmud would all recognize what you are describing as a classic instance of prudence. You don't get the world that conforms to your ideals. You don't even get a world that approximates to your ideals. You get a world that is 1,000 miles away from your ideals, and you have two choices. One is to nope out and be responsible for whatever the world is as it is, because you have no effect on it. And the other is to get your hands dirty and admit that you were never clean to begin.
And on this point, you bring up good old Aristotle.
Yeah.
He doesn't just say prudence is a virtue. He says prudence is the paramount political virtue. It is the most important of the political virtues. Yes. And so we cannot afford to have Christians just throwing their hands up in the air in a kind of suicidal political quietism that is really a homicidal political quietism, because it's going to take a lot of good people down with them.
That's why it's here. And Jordan Peterson was here. Who's this guy?
Who am I? Who are you? I've never seen this man in my life.
That's right.
Even with President Trump, he has become more fluent in speaking as a conservative since he ran in 2015. And, it shows on the trail.
So what does the pro-life movement do next, then, as they're looking at this Trump administration that managed, what we think will be the Trump administration, that managed to win while tacking to the center on that issue, changing the language of the GOP platform? How do they now navigate a world in which the GOP doesn't necessarily entirely back their policies, and yet they also have Dobbs?
I think that's overstated. I think, Jeremy, you made this point very well earlier in the show. Trump got a lot of flack for taking the abortion ban out of the GOP platform. I think the reason he got flack for that is because people refused to acknowledge that the Dobbs decision didn't just move the ball down the field for us. It did do that. It fundamentally changed the field. It reset the field. Previously, before Dobbs, calling for a national abortion ban was not only a just thing to do, it was politically advantageous to Republicans. It ceased to be politically advantageous after we had lost every ballot referendum that we had put up for pro-life. So, I don't want to just flack for Trump here and say that I would have said exactly the same things he did or whatever. He initially said he would support the pro-abortion amendment in Florida. Then he came around, he said, no, I'm not going to support it. He's changed his language a little over time, but we are in a completely new ballgame here. And so the goal is to protect innocent life. That's the goal. We're gonna have to change our strategy up a little.
I think what it means is obviously the fight is state to state now, and it's an incremental fight, and that's something that pro-lifers and conservatives just have to. There's always this argument, especially among Christians, about, well, incrementalism, is that really the way to? Of course, that's the way to go. That's incrementalism. Just means that
the only way to move.
You're going to take the best possible thing you can have now is what you're going to take. That's just life. That's every day, every moment of life. You choose the best possible thing you can have, and that's going to be the fight going forward.
That's of course right. The problem with Roe v. Wade is that it allowed Republican politicians to lie to pro-life voters for 50 plus years and say that they were abortion absolutists when the vast majority of them weren't. But they could never be called on it because Roe was never going to be overturned. Yeah. And then the unimaginable happened and Roe was overturned. And suddenly you're realizing that these politicians were always just being politicians. Life was an easy layup win, that they were never going to be responsible for advancing in any way. And what I truly believe is that the fight for overturning Roe was a long shot fight that took a generation and a half to win. And the fight for now, the actual fight against abortion was not the fight against Roe v. Wade. That was the fight against Roe v. Wade. The actual fight against abortion is going to be a generation and a half of fighting in the culture, which we have not done at this level before, of technological advances, which some Christians will find distasteful, but will actually help over time reduce abortion, of national revival, which will be an incredibly difficult thing to accomplish, but has been going on since the beginning of time. There's always been a cycle of falling away from God and drawing nearer to God. Like that is just part of the human civilizational experience. I actually think that all the trend lines actually work in our favor over time to do away with this complete horror called abortion. Again, no one is more pro-life than me. There are things that I believe about abortion that I cannot say on the air because we would be deplatformed. I'm a complete and total abolitionist radical. And yet I do live on a planet where I know I'm not trying to preserve ever. I'm not trying to preserve my positive view of myself. I don't care if you think I'm a bad Christian. I am a bad Christian. That's what it means to be a Christian. When you think you're a good Christian, I don't believe you understand Christianity in the first place, the premise of which is all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. You can't make me feel guilty. I know how pro-life I am, and I am just telling you, no matter what any politician tells you, abortion is not going to become illegal in this country in 2024. It's not going to become illegal in this country in 2028. It's not going to become illegal in this country in 2032. That is not how that fight is going to happen. That is not the timeline on which that fight is going to happen. You're going to have to actually get your hands dirty and win incremental gains at the local and state level
on everything,
every day,
on every subject. By the way, I asked Matt. I know you want to say so. I'll make sure you get. I just want to. It just occurred to me. I asked Matt in the other room, "Who's the second unhappiest man in the world?" And he immediately said, "Second happiest. Happiest is
Trump.
Is Trump." And he got Joe Biden. So I have another riddle for all of you. And this is the world. So I'll give you a hint. It's a non-American. Who is the least happy person outside of Kamala Harris at this time?
Non-American.
Non-American.
Non-American. So Barack Obama, clearly. That'll be who we mean.
The Ayatollah?
Correct.
The Ayatollah. That's right.
This is his nightmare.
Yeah.
Because he can't do what he wants if there's a President Trump.
Right.
I asked Neil Ferguson, one of the greatest living historians, who I don't identify. I mean, he's conservative, but he's not political particularly. He was at Harvard, and then he's married to Ayaan Hirsi Ali. He's an extraordinary man. I asked him on my show, and I had no idea what he would say. This is 3 years ago. Would Putin have invaded Ukraine if Donald Trump were president? I give you all my word. I did not know what he would say. But I wanted to know from one of the few historians I respect what the answer was. There wasn't a gap, and he said no.
Certainly not.
Yeah, of course not.
And the same thing with Khamenei, with regard to Israel. He could do whatever he wants because the Democrats were in power. Yeah. And now, if Trump is elected, this is a new ball game in the Middle East.
You know, I think this thing about...
Wait, I promised her.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Well, now I'm taking it back to abortion, and it feels like we've moved on.
No.
Yeah,
we do that, yeah.
But my question is, does the pro-life movement learn how to leverage their political power again? Because I think when you look at so many of the rank and file, they look at something like that as distasteful because they have now spent decades looking for, I'm just trying to elect someone who agrees with me, as opposed to, I am learning how to wield sticks and carrots. And how do they get back to that?
Part of the thing about Roe v. Wade is that it legitimately changed the culture, legitimately changed. A generation grew up thinking that this was an urgent human right to kill your baby, and that this baby was not an individual person, and there's no logic to it, and it has no excuse, but it is what people believe. It is where they live. And so I think people like Lila Rose, people who've been sincere fighters, really did change over their tactics over time to address that culture. But now they have to address it at its deepest level. And I'm sorry, that's going to take things that conservatives are bad at. It's going to take art. It's going to take, a new kind of way of talking. And it's going to take sympathy with people that we don't have sympathy with, and forgiveness for people who we wish we didn't have to forgive. Today on X, there was a beautiful video of a woman talking about how the father of her baby wanted her to abort, and she said, "No, and I'll never sue you, just go away." And then the doctor said, "This baby is going to be deformed, you should abort." She said, "Absolutely not, I'm not going to do it." Had the baby's now 5 years old, beautiful baby, completely undeformed. And she told her story. I mean, I was sitting there going like, oh my God, it was a beautiful. And I retweeted it, and people started posting things like, did she have to use the F word so much?
Yeah.
And did she have this, that's where we got it. That's what we have to get past. So we have to get past that and understand that that's a hero. She grew up in a culture that didn't teach her not to say the F word, and we've got to change it.
I just want to say that the pro-life fight in the trenches doesn't change at all. Mm-hmm. Because like in the trenches, and I do want, this is important to say, because like I said before about how all the conservatives like ripping each other apart for the last 4 years has been very troubling, and I hope we can get past some of that. And some of that has also been the way that some people on the right have turned against pro-lifers and pro-life activists and talked about them like they're nothing but frauds. Yeah. They haven't achieved anything. And it's like, no, you say that because you've never been around these people. You've never been in the trenches. But the real pro-life fighters are the ones that are at the clinics, okay? And they're going to the clinics on Saturday mornings, and they're talking to the women who are going in, and they're running like pregnancy resource centers. And that's the actual movement. Like, those are the people that are leading this movement. And their job doesn't change. I mean, their job is exactly the same as it's always been. And any victory, and I agree with changing the culture and art and all that stuff at a higher level needs to be done. But those people in the fight against abortion are the anchor of the movement, always have been. So that's why I also have grace, because a lot of those people tend to be more of the absolutists, and they have trouble with the incremental approach. Yeah. And I believe in the incremental approach, but for them, like, this is their life, and they've given their life to it, and that's why they have trouble sometimes doing what they see as compromise when they're in this every day. So I understand that emotionally, but
you're also going to suffer setbacks. Like, overturning Roe was always going to lead to an increase in abortion. Roe was in some ways a bulwark. I'm sorry, Roe was in some ways actually a limiting factor for abortion in many parts of the country. And now that it's gone, what we're seeing is that, yes, some states like Florida are able to have great abortion law, and some states like Minnesota are going to be like, bring us your 5-year-old and we'll deal with this problem for you. Because Roe had limits on trimesters, and of course they found ways around all that, but it was a national, broadly applied.
So maybe, therefore, law may not be the best vehicle. This is my position. My position is that there are two better vehicles than laws, because there will always be states that allow it, and that will obviate the power of the law. One is persuasion. I will just say my PragerU video on abortion, which begins with, I am not addressing the issue of legality, only the issue of morality, is gone viral. It's like 10 million views, at least. And without once saying a word about legal or not legal. But when you make which I think is an unanswerable case for, how could you argue that if a mugger shoots a woman who is pregnant and kills the baby, he goes to prison for murder? But if she wants the child killed, then it's a non-issue. It's not tenable morally. The other is, how about this, if you're going to pass a law, and this law I would be for, informed consent. That's all. If you go for an abortion, we want you to know what is involved. Here is a film on what the fetus is, what is happening right now. Then make up your mind and make that film unemotional, as objective, as scientific as possible, informed consent, it'd be very hard for liberals to argue. Leftists will always argue against it. But I think liberals will say, well, we'll make that trade, you don't ban it, and we'll give you informed consent laws. How's that possibility?
I don't know that it would do what we think that would do, only because if you look at what just happened in Washington, D.C., and you see these women marching through the streets now, banging on their drums in this very sort of sacrament way as they're talking about abortion, I do think there is a part of the pro-life movement that talks about women like we don't understand what we're doing when we do that. And I think that maybe there's a little naivety when they look at women like that, like everyone is a 17-year-old girl who doesn't fully understand how this functions. And I think most women today, we do know. And there does need to be a certain movement towards talking honestly about women's understanding about the evil practice they're engaging in.
What I think is that we're not going to know how to abolish abortion for at least 40 years. I think it's going to be truly a generation and a half struggle. It doesn't mean we're not going to gain all kinds of victories along that road. We'll get it obviated in states. We'll get it outright banned in states. We'll find technological solutions that help us with the persuasion argument. Already ultrasounds are very powerful tools for helping convince women that there is a path beyond abortion. I think there will be all kinds of victories between here and there. But just like we didn't know that a pro-choice, lifelong New York Democrat was going to give us the justices that overturned Roe v. Wade, we don't know sitting here today how we're ultimately going to win this fight. We just have to keep fighting it. Right now, we have to go say thank you to some of our sponsors who made it possible for us to bring you this broadcast tonight, and we'll be right back after.